40s, dance, Latin, country, pop, rock and roll, all in one station, mixing genres and generations. You're listening to KNLY, New Waverly, Texas, 91.1 FM, The Boss.
Programs presented are submitted by members of our community and are a proud sponsor of KNLY 91.1 FM. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect those of KNLY 91.1 FM, The Boss, and affiliates.
Welcome everybody to Superhuman with Dr. V and Jason Phelps. We have a really cool show for you today. I have one of my longtime friends, Dr. J. Flottmann. I'm going to take a real short, a little bit of time to intro him because he literally, he lives the life that a lot of us dream about. You know, I grew up wanting to be a fighter pilot. You know, I'm sure everybody in the '80s was, you know, watched Top Gun and hey, I'm gonna fly a F-14 so Dr. J does all that. So Dr. J is a Air Force MD, retired, and now he's a fighter pilot, true fighter pilot, real fighter pilot. I'll let him kind of talk about what he does, but we really resonate as far as our approach to medicine, because we both believe in kind of root cause medicine instead of just kind of naming the disease, giving them the drug, looking for a true root cause. We both believe in food as medicine, and looking for just a better approach to overall health. And you there with us, Dr. J? Can you hear us?
I can hear you loud.
Hey, bud.
Sure, man.
So, man, I'm really looking forward to this as far as just catching up with you. I haven't gotten to spend time with you lately, but kind of want to hear, you know, your take on this. But because he's got a very long history of dealing with this. He's testified in front of Congress, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about that, about as far as how chronic disease is going to impact our, you know, fiscal, you know, responsibility here in the United States. You know, chronic disease itself is now the single biggest threat to global economic development. Okay, 95. This is a big number. $95 trillion. That's the estimate that's going to be put on the American economy, not the world, but the American economy, that chronic disease is going to have in the next 35 years. In both direct healthcare costs and indirect costs like lost productivity, disability. Just to put that in perspective, our GDP, or gross domestic product, right now in the U.S. is $20 trillion a year. Okay, so we're talking about 95 in the next 35 years. According to the World Bank in 2017, the GDP of the entire world was $80 trillion. So we're talking about just chronic disease causing $95 trillion in losses. So big number, big things to tackle. Want to bring in Dr. J. How you been, man?
Man, I have been good. I love it. Dr. V, I love that.
Oh, yeah, you knew me before that.
I've heard that.
Yeah, you knew me before.
I like it, man. I like it a lot.
Gotcha.
I've been good, Willie. It's been an interesting last several months, if you can say that.
So how are you liking being a true now just fighter pilot for fun? Talk about that a little bit. So what are you doing now?
Yeah, sure. It's really crazy, man. I never had any intent in my life to fly airplanes. In fact, I wasn't exposed to it. I didn't know anything about it. But I figured I had to figure out a way to pay for medical school when I was in college. So I decided to join the Air Force just to pay for medical school. And then got into the Air Force after going to UTMB there in Galveston, and was exposed a little bit to the Air Force and airplanes, but still not really anything what you would expect from somebody who now, is a pilot. But what happened was really interesting. I decided that I didn't want to be a pediatrician. Nothing against that. I love the kids. I love the families. I just didn't really like the medicine that much,
Yeah.
which is crazy. So I decided to be a flight surgeon, and part of that training included jumping into an airplane to see, what that environment was all about. And I have to tell you, Willie, if you guys love roller coasters, you love, high adrenaline athletics, you love being part of something. I wasn't big enough to be a professional or a collegiate athlete, but I always played sports. I got into this airplane and I recognized, dude, this is my chance to be a professional athlete because it's an athletic event. And I started to figure out that I really loved it. And I wondered if there was a program or I wondered if the Air Force ever had flight docs, flight surgeons that actually became pilots and flew the airplane. So that in itself, I kind of took a leap and I started doing some research, and I found out there was a small program.
There you go.
And,
we got your video, and I can see you.
Sorry, man.
Oh, you're
Sorry.
good.
So I got exposed to this program called Pilot Position Program, and then I found out that I could apply to pilot training in the Air Force, and lo and behold, I got accepted, and then I went to pilot training, just kind of like your average Air Force pilot. And while there, competed with all of my classmates, and I had the opportunity to get into a F-15C Eagle, which is this guy right here behind me.
Yeah.
Dude, that was, my dream. It was a air superiority machine. It was one roll, basically, and I absolutely loved having that
Did you
opportunity.
fly the F-19 Raptor also? Did you get a chance to get
F-22
it?
Raptor.
F-22
So-
Raptor.
No, that's a good question. What happened? So I flew the Eagle, and then I did another assignment. And right about 2008, I don't know if you guys remember, but the F-22,
They grounded
newest, the Raptor, the most premier tactical fighter in the world. Stealth technology, super cruise technology, super awesome airplane. Right? It started having physiologic episodes in the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
You guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a single seat airplane. So no medical person had ever flown that airplane to get a real firsthand feel of that environment. And long story short, I did have an opportunity to be part of that program, and I was and is the only medical doctor to have ever flown that airplane. And I have to say that airplane is unbelievable. And that's kind of what led me to, talking to Congress about what I experienced. And it actually started a whole cascade that littered the rest of my career in the Air Force to investigate human performance in high-speed aviation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where you and I
Intersected,
started our conversations,
Yeah.
because we talked about human performance. We talked about the things we were seeing in the typical medical world and how they weren't really addressing that aspect of our daily lives. And it could be, a fighter pilot environment. It could be going to school and being a teacher. It could be whatever it is that you do, taking care of a family, whatever it is, it could be, that's your performance environment. And how can we optimize that environment, or at least that performance in the environment?
Well, we basically that's where again we met and we started our kind of friendship and not just from that aspect, but again from the addressing the chronic disease issue. And I know you
Yes.
you were saying you testified in front of Congress, and you want to talk a little bit about that. You had mentioned that Eisenhower paper.
Sure. So yeah, part of my I guess education in the military is they send you, if they send a select few people to do an in-residence master's program, and some of the officers go to a place called the Eisenhower School for National Resource and Strategy. So the idea is that we are going to be students of industry, right? We're going to be students of industry. We're going to see how industry and national security intersect, and we're going to try to distill what kind of things we can do as far as strategy to influence how our national security intersects with industry, and we all move forward in the best interest of the country. And part of my area of study involved a medical symposium, and I really was interested in economics, right? And how you kind of hit it at the very beginning of the show. You talked about how chronic disease influences the economies of the world, more specifically of the United States. Well, take that one step further, Willie. When you intersect chronic disease, economy, you have to include national security, because where do we get our people from, right? From the country. And if the country as a whole is influenced by chronic disease, which you've just kind of outlined, then it impacts national security. And that was one of the focuses of a paper that I put together.
I have one of your graphs over. Just put one of your graphs up, and it just basically, I remember you saying that, you know, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all of that is going to be shoved out. You know, it's going to shove out federal and military spending.
That's right.
In the next few years.
It's going to grow, right? And that's kind of what you hinted on, is the chronic disease problem is influenced in the Medicare and Medicaid spending. And the more that those two entities spend on chronic disease, the more they push out other required spending things like national security,
defense.
You know? And if we look at it like that, then we have to really ask ourselves as a country, what can we do to influence those spending pieces of the pie, right? Because they end up being a piece of a pie that is all about required amounts of money. So entitlements, you know, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Don't forget the interest that we have to pay on our debt, right? That's only going to get bigger. So if Medicare and Medicaid take a larger percentage of that pie over time, and net interest continues to take a larger percentage of that pie, then it has to move other things out of that pie, and that includes our defense spending, right? So that's how it kind of one way monetarily that it influences national security. That's really not even talking about the health of the people that we want to bring in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, dude.
You know,
I see that every day.
Yeah, and there was a sobering stat that over 50% of all the kids coming in are unfit for military service. They're actually being turned away. That's the most latest stat. And the majority of these kids coming in, we're starting to see type 2 diabetes, prediabetes. You know, in America, 1 in 4 teenagers now has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, and that's a disease that it used to be unheard of in this age group. You know, when we talk about chronic disease, just to clear it up for the listeners, is, you know, I really call the lifestyle caused diseases. You know, heart disease, diabetes, cancer. Now those kill 50 million people a year, more than twice as many that die from infectious diseases. Okay. And again, this is where, again, you and I resonate as far as I think a lot of it starts with literally what we eat, you know, and this is why I love having, you know, Jason and I also, you know, Jason's here. I'll let him say hi.
I've been very quiet.
Yeah, he's been watching.
Catching up, but hey, Dr. J, how are you today?
This is Jason.
Hey,
he's
I'm good, thanks.
my buddy.
Good.
Awesome.
So, but basically, you know, Jason and Rebecca do it. They have the Woodlands Contest Prep here, and they do a very dialed in for athletes, but y'all also have a lot of wellness patients also.
Yeah,
you know?
Rebecca specifically, you know, she has a long history of autoimmune issues and something that she's somewhat of an expert on, and so we do work with a lot of people that have you know, some lifestyle issues, but a lot of them are things that people have you know, developed over time, and we really dig into a lot of those, but we try to optimize those people as well, not just make them healthy, but turn them into rock stars.
And Dr. J, that's not your typical like contest prep. You'd love Jason and Rebecca in that they don't just get somebody ready to compete. They actually improve their health. They don't just give them a plan and here's a workout program. It's all literally about overall health and wellness, you know, from a dietary standpoint. Now, you and I, you know, that's, again, like we keep going back, you and I, that's where we resonate as far as, now, what started making your shift, you know, from the medical model into functional medicine, food as medicine, things like that, as kind of the emphasis?
Absolutely.
Was there like a tipping point, something in particular that?
There was. Yeah, it was actually during this time that I was in school in 2015. I was part of a, like I said, a medical symposium, and this is the moment that it changed for me. We had a guy, a guest speaker, come into to our seminar, and his name is Dallas Hack. He's a doctor, MD. At that time, he was still active duty in the Army. He was a colonel, and he was in charge of the traumatic brain injury department for the Army Research Lab. And he came to talk to our seminar about traumatic brain injury. Now, you guys know, and you've heard this before, but our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and our coasties, traumatic brain injury is a real problem in the military. And what we see as an outcome is very hard to diagnose, right? And it could be, you know, a lot of the service members that deal with depression, suicide ideology, you know, we have a real problem in the military with suicide, right? And a lot of the guys that have mental health issues can be traced back to some form of TBI. So Dr. Hack came and spoke with us. How do we diagnose it? That was the first problem. It's so varied in its presentation that it's hard to pinpoint, okay, if A, B, and C are presented with this patient, we can firmly say they've had TBI. That's not the way it is. Oh, wait a minute. What if we get a CAT scan or an MRI? It should also show A, B, and C. Wait a minute, that's not how it is. So the varied expression of TBI was the first problem. The second problem is, how do we treat it? That is a big deal, right? Do we treat it with medication? Do we treat it with counseling? Do we treat it with all of the above? And then one of my classmates asked, and he was an Army guy, he was in the public health, he was kind of a, what do you call him? More of a administrator, health administrator, thank you. So he asked Dr. Hack if he had ever heard of this particular company. And the company that he listed kind of intrigued me by the name. So I reached out to my classmate and said, hey, tell me about this company. He put me in contact with a former colleague of his that had gotten out of the Army and started investigating a particular compound. That's the way, a molecule, if you will. And so I reached out to this company. I got a PDF, and it was filled with research. And here's what's interesting, guys. And I don't know if you guys have talked about this specifically, but the article that she sent me was full of research dealing with ketone bodies. So I don't know, you know, from my background as a medical doctor, the first time I
ketones bad.
Ketones bad.
Ketones bad.
Ketones bad. In fact, I remember a friend of mine asking me, hey, what do you know about ketosis? And I said, well, it's a pathologic state, right? I was like, it's the end result of out of control type 1 diabetes. So I had confused
ketoacidosis and ketosis.
Yes, I confused that, and I associated them and kind of made them one and the same. So when I started actually reading the articles on this PDF, I got pretty excited because it was all about a guy. It started from a guy that I read the first article, Dr. Veach, who was at the National Institute of Health. And he was doing some work years ago to try to develop a super fuel for military operators. So this was kind of cool. Super fuel for military operators. This was right in my wheelhouse, man. I'm all about that. So I started just doing a lot of research. That was the turning point, and that kind of led me down the rabbit trail of investigating, okay, I need to change my paradigm of thinking from disease process, medication. I need to change my
paradigm. Give it a name, give it a drug.
Yes. I need to say, let's look at the cause of this process and see if there's anything we can do before the drug, right? Before the problem to address this. And that's kind of the tipping point.
Well, like these,
so that started it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, the work of Veach and Kieran Clark, that was they were ketone esters, and esters, they work medically. They're very expensive. They taste like alcohol, like gasoline. Sorry, they taste like gasoline.
Right.
So, and they really raise your millimole level to very, very high levels, like 8 millimoles. Regular ketosis is like 0.5 to 2.5 or 3 millimoles, depending on what you do. Ketoacidosis is more like 15 to 25 millimoles. That's pathologic. That's impossible to happen unless you have uncontrolled type 1 or type 1 or uncontrolled type 2. But it's advanced into, it's no different also from MCTs. So we've been taking even bodybuilding, like MCTs forever. Why? Because they convert into ketone bodies. The body converts them into ketone bodies. So they've been using that for years, but also then it advanced to ketone salts. As far as that, there's overwhelming data about TBIs now and ketone bodies, BHB in particular, even acetoacetate, both of them. But the data is pretty overwhelming as far as at least exhausting those before we go on to another medication. And even things like MCTs, like if you look at the work of Dr. Mary Newport, Mary Newport, Dr. Newport, she's very, very big about the ketones in MCT oils. Hers specifically, she came out with a specific MCT oil. But again, why? Because a lot of these things, not just the TBI, and that's what started shifting you, and now you're kind of, you and I, as far as there's so many other aspects of chronic disease. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, all these things. Again, they still go back to food and our poor eating habits. There's a famous saying that says, people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are healed and are healed by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. There's a total disconnect on both sides.
You have all these organizations, government organizations that control and we were talking about that before we came on. Control our food.
And
basically.
eight main organizations, but none of them. There's no intertalk. There's no intertalk between them. On the one side, the government tells us to eat 50% of our plate as fruits and vegetables, but then only 2% of the U.S. farmland is dedicated to growing fruits and vegetables. So I mean, it's just crazy. 59% of all the farmland is used to grow commodity crops. 3 main ones: soy, corn, and grain. Soy, corn, and wheat. Sorry. And those get turned into the ultra processed foods we now know are deadly. I mean, so processed foods, literally. If I were to ask you, Dr. J, like, what do you think the average American's daily diet is in processed foods?
As far as percentage or what?
Percentage.
Oh gosh.
You didn't know you were getting a quiz today.
Yeah.
60 to 70%.
You're right. You nailed it. 60%. 60% of the average American diet is processed food. It's
I believe it.
It's so crazy. So overall, 27% of the farmland in the U.S. is used to produce food for humans. 67% is used to grow food for factory farm animals. 1% of the corn, again, most of it's corn. 1% of the corn that's grown is actually consumed by humans as sweet corn. The rest is dent, so food oils, animal feed, ethanol, high fructose corn syrup for your sugar, drinks, biodegradable plastic, alcohol, food starch, food additives. It's bad. I mean, it's bad. But again, it goes back to the food. So this is leading to a lot of the chronic diseases and things we're seeing. So,
hey, did you?
Yeah.
I just have to ask you a question
real
quick because you mentioned the high fructose corn syrup. So I know that this is not about the current virus that we're dealing with, but my gosh, I follow Peter Attia. MD. I don't know if you know.
I listen to The Drive.
I follow him.
Yeah.
He put out an article not too long ago, and he talked about high fructose corn syrup and the association with outcome with the coronavirus. And I was really interested to see how that data presented because
I have a little bit of data. Hey, we're going to go to a quick break right now with our commercials and our sponsors, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Turn on your glam today. The Jenna Klein collection is here, elaborated with natural products. Give yourself a compliment with our organic lip glosses in more than 15 shades. With the Jenna Klein lip gloss collection, you can hydrate your lips and keep that glamorous look that you need. Turn on your glam. Visit jennaklein.com. And don't forget our skincare collection with natural ingredients that will improve the skin's appearance and prevent visible signs of aging. We have everything you need to achieve smooth and vitalized skin. jennaklein.com. Turn on your glam today.
This was a proud sponsor of KNLY 91.1 FM. It's time to change. If you like country, we play it. If you like pop, we play it. If you like Latin music, we play it. If you like rock and roll, we play it. Because no one does fusion music like we do. 91.1 FM, The Boss.
It started as a dream. When I was a little kid, I always wanted to have my own restaurant. And it was a dream that finally we had the opportunity to build it here in the Woodlands. And I'm so happy with it.
It's a really authentic Italian food. I try to maintain the most original possible. It's very important. Every day I make my fresh pasta.
Chi mangia bene, mangia italiano. Please come and visit us.
This was a proud sponsor of KNLY 91.1 FM.
All right, we're back. You there, Dr. J?
I'm here.
All right, buddy. Yeah. So going back to that, that kind of started shifting your model from the typical medical model that we all were taught, right, to
right.
A more of a food-based, seeing the importance of food. Now, as far as you right now, what and towards the end of your career, what were you recommending as far as for performance? For what kind of diets, what kind of supplements were you recommending for patients? Basically, How did that shift?
Right. It shifted, again, starting about there of 2015, and then as it continued, what I started to see, and I kind of saw it from the medical side as well as from the flying side. As I was getting older, I was getting more, and my colleagues were getting older. Here's what I was seeing. I was seeing a lot of broken fighter pilots. And what I mean by that is, if you can imagine your work environment, instead of sitting at a desk or walking through an office and seeing patients, you're in a seat and you're out there flying, and sometimes you're pulling 9 times your body weight. And you think about the impact that has on your joints, your spine specifically, cervical, thoracic, lumbar. And what I was seeing was guys that were approaching the end of their career were broken. I mean, their necks were hurting. Some of them had to go through surgeries. Their lower backs were hurting. I was seeing a lot of slipped discs. I was seeing a lot of numbness, tingling the extremities. And I was thinking, my gosh, these guys they're performing in an environment that is unnatural, number one, and it's unlike anything else out there in the working world, to include professional athletics, And what I was seeing was, how do we treat these athletes? Do we treat them like the professional athletes that we are? Do they have a strength and conditioning coach? Do they have an athletic trainer? Do they have a physical therapist or a therapist that travels with them as part of their unit? The answer in the United States, resoundingly, is no. But if you look at our colleagues across the pond, we had folks come in from the UK and participate in a joint exercise in Virginia. They brought their physiotherapist with them. Part of their unit is taking care of the operator. Yeah. Then I looked at the Army, special operators. They have people dedicated to the physical and mental health of their operators. Why don't the United States Air Force and Navy pilots have that are exposed to just as tremendous environments. So I started to think, how can we approach this from a kind of like a business point of view? How can we approach this across the spectrum of United States Air Force?
Well, those guys are assets.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
they're no longer people.
There's so
yeah.
much time and energy and money invested in the performance of these guys to not focus on recovery and focus on
and think about this. Yeah, guess what happens when a guy retires and he goes for his disability, you know, and he gets 50 plus disability because his back's jacked up and his neck's jacked up, and who pays for that?
Right.
Taxpayers. So it becomes a bigger deal when you look at it like that. So I started working on a program, and I put together a program, and it's called Optimizing the Human Weapon System. And even to this day, I brief incoming F-22 pilots on how to optimize their performance, and I include basically a few pillars. You've already hit on some of them. Food is probably the biggest one. And Willie, my general categorization, or my recommendation, if you will, is very simple. I want to minimize the crap in their diet, the CRAP. So they're sweetened carbonated beverages, the first one, the refined products, the artificial products, and processed foods. And how can I do that is encourage whole food eating. So things that grow above the ground generally, green leafies, absolutely. Things that are not white in color. So I kind of try to minimize the starchy potatoes, rice, pastas, definitely refined sugars. Those white foods, I try to replace those with green foods, or things that, like I said, grow above the ground. I don't really recommend limiting the animal proteins. I'm more of a kind of a high fat, low carb enthusiast, if you will. And the whole idea behind it, and you guys may have used this term before, but I know you've heard about it, is metabolic flexibility. And that's one thing that you hinted on earlier, is we have gone so far away from having the flexibility to tap into
to eat a starch if we need it. And that's the thing is, a lot of people mistake ketogenic or low carb or a low carb high, all these as, well, I can never eat it again, and that's not the point. The problem is that's like I said, 60% of the average diet is processed. So it's not even doing it all the time. It's like you're not even doing it at all. So when you talk about metabolic flexibility, like when I tell people about ketogenic diet or low carb, high fat diet, or other diets, paleo, the goal is not to eat that every day from now on the rest of your life. It's and be a stickler and be 100%. It's to get your body to metabolic flexibility to where now if I go out to eat with my wife and kids and I want to have a piece of cake that one time, I can, and it doesn't spike my blood sugar, but I'm not doing that every day. The problem is most people are eating it breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and not limiting that sort. So they don't have the flexibility.
They end up with those chronic issues.
Then they end up with the chronic issues from the inflammation.
Yeah.
So, you nailed it as far as that. Again, it's not metabolic flexibility. The goal is to get to metabolic flexibility, and metabolic flexibility isn't something that's superhuman. It's something that our body it's how our body was meant to function, and we're not functioning that way anymore.
Yeah. And it's funny,
Absolutely.
Dr. Willie and I, we really, ourselves, we do very similar diets, but they're on other sides of the spectrum. So mine is very high protein, very high carb, very low fat. But when I go out to eat, it's, I can have some fats. When I think about dessert, I get to have fat, and my body will use it, and it won't, I won't store it.
And I will tell you, I follow his lab. So like Dr. J, like Jason, he's as far as a specimen, he lifts, he trains, he does all these. So he utilizes the carbohydrates he uses, and he times them. So, and that's a big thing. I think people try to normalize and generalize it, and try to say, well, Jason eats high carb, and it's like, well, yeah, but they're whole food carbs. There's a distinction.
It's still not processed.
It's still not processed.
You know,
It's still not,
very low glycemic carbs almost the entire time.
Yeah, and you see, so it's very specific, and they try to generalize it. So you got to be, okay, when you say, okay, mostly animal or mostly vegetable. Okay, what vegetables? What animal proteins? Yeah. When you say high carb, what carbs? We're not talking about, he's not eating chips and he's not eating, So, you and I follow that as far as from a medical standpoint, because the majority of, for us, is trying to get them just back to metabolic flexibility where their blood sugar is controlled.
Yes.
1 in 2 Americans now is pre-diabetic or diabetic.
Hey, Dr. J, can I ask you a question about your pilots that you work with? And so when you first entered, when did you first join the Air Force?
Oh, I was finished medical school in 97, so I entered the Air Force in 97, and I went to pilot training in 2003.
Okay.
2002.
So in that time since, so we're talking about basically a 20-year period, have there been changes to what the pilots are expected physically, what's expected of them? And is that something that you have
That's
control
a good
on?
question.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the more appropriate answer to get to that is that the airplanes have changed.
Right.
So, when I first came on the scene, the Raptor wasn't really part of the vernacular. It was out there in the test world, but it really wasn't part of the operational world. Mm-hmm. The F-15, F-16 were, but if you take a generation before me, where guys were flying F-4s and then transitioned to F-16s, that was a night and day difference in performance. So the airplanes can easily outperform the human in the seat. And what happened during my tenure is, I would say, from the F-15 to now you have F-35 as the predominant, workhorse. What's changing is the processing power of the airplane, and how that influences the human is now, think about operating at a high, kind of a high athletic environment, and now having to process mentally all the information that your airplane is giving you. Mm-hmm. So it's not only physically demanding, but it can now be more of a mental processing environment, that you have to be on top of your game mentally, as well as the ability to transition to a physical game should the conflict arise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I guess that does lead me to kind of what I was going to ask next, which is, how does your recommendations for diet and for recovery and those kind of things, how have those changed to make that possible for them to perform at that optimal level now with higher levels of sophistication?
Yep. Well, the first issue, I think, even before you get to that recommendation, is just kind of making the cadre of pilots aware of performance, and how things that you guys understand because of what you do. In other words, you understand that what you eat has an effect on how you perform. The typical fighter pilot, breakfast, it used to be, years ago, it was a cigarette and a cup of coffee, right? Mm-hmm. And although smoking may help with pulling G's, because it may increase your resting blood pressure, it's not a good outcome in the long term, So over time, you have to transition. Okay, donuts and coffee will give you a spike in blood sugar. That's probably not what you should be eating to maximize your performance. Even though, I'll be honest with you, even to this day, very few, I don't know if I'd say very few, but it's not the normal for a fighter squadron, a population, to think about those type of things as it relates to performance. I just have to be honest with you. Yeah. It's just not part of the common vernacular that we talk about. But I think that's changing over time. And although my scope right now is kind of limited to the F-22 community, I think as I've flown that jet, I've experienced the environment, I know what it takes from a processing point of view. If there is one thing I can influence these guys to do, is to think about what they do with their forks, their fingers, their feet, to optimize that performance that they're going to be executing in the airplane. And I think, I do kind of recommend what I generally follow, and I talk about, the goals of exercise with regard to the environment that they work in. I know Willie and I have shared a lot of conversation about what kind of, he's a CrossFit beast with a long history of success there. I'm more of I kind of follow that stuff, but I'm not quite as disciplined. So I kind of lean towards more strength training, particularly in that environment. So I kind of keep it very simple for these guys, a squat, a press, a lift of some fashion, and then be mindful of what goes on your fork and how you use your fingers.
So what's crazy is, you're talking about it for fighter pilots that are flying, these very expensive, very expensive, jets. But again, what you brought into it is kind of like the same thing that what I brought into medicine was what I saw was working very, very well for myself, for high-end athletes. Again, just translates very, very well to the average person, because some people are saying, oh, okay, well, great, I'm not a fighter pilot. Okay, great, I'm not a high-end athlete. Okay, no. It translates to what, to the average person that doesn't want to hurt and has diabetes and wants to feel better. So it literally, we're not talking about high-end performance and going to the gym every day. I'm talking about, number one, what have we talked about? For overall health, the very first thing you need to do is watch what you put in your mouth every single day. And that's the last thing. They kind of blow it off. Everybody. I have this conversation about 5 times daily on people coming to see me at the clinic, and they're just blown away by the fact that, well, I just want, it starts with diet and nutrition. And it's literally, I had the perfect examples. Last week I had a mechanic, and he's the main one that got it right away, is because I said, you're a mechanic. I said, what happens if I put sludge and I put crappy fuel in your car?
That's a great analogy.
It's not going to run well. And he's like, oh, I get it. And he got it right away. But the average person doesn't get that the food that we put in our body, that's what fuels it. That's going to make you show up healthy or make you sick. It's what's going to make you, your immune system go up, and how are you going to respond if and when you get the corona? And how are you going to recover? Everything.
You guys have probably already talked about the association.
Oh, we've had a couple of shows.
Coronavirus.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, so again, 60% of the U.S. population has one chronic disease, right? 40% has 2 or more. So what I say about the corona, or about COVID, is that we were primed in the United States, not even the United States, but worldwide. We were primed for something like a flu. Okay, we were primed for the coronavirus to actually damage us in the way it did, because we're mostly sick. Yeah. The majority of us are not healthy and have a chronic disease and are mostly sick. So again, the point being, what you're recommending to your pilots for performance is no difference in what we would recommend to a high-end athlete. Is now in the specifics, yes, but again, in the basics, food, exercise and activity, all those
major blocks are exactly
resistance training, the same pillars. So you call them pillars. I call them the same thing. I have 4 major pillars: diet, nutrition, exercise, activity, hormones. Because sometimes we have to address hormones, and then the intangibles: sleep, meditation,
stress,
mental health, stress, all those things that we don't address, but we need to medically. And so, there's, and then you can move on to nootropics, because people come in and they go, hey, what supplements should I take? And I'm like, back up. Like, well, how do you eat? How do you sleep? What do you drink?
Let's put all the big rocks in first before we start pouring the sand.
How much sun do you get? Things like that. It's just something, the basics. So again, to reemphasize, what you're doing with high-end pilots is the same thing that we recommend. I want my guy with hypertension to have.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I kind of use that as an example, but in my telemedicine work, it's very similar,
Yeah.
I start off with asking them those same questions. What are you eating? How are you sleeping? What's going on in your life? How many kids do you have? What do you do for work? Do you smoke? I mean, those kind of questions lead you to hopefully a recommendation that involves all of those things, because I mean, you probably learned the same thing that I did in school, is that we don't spend enough time addressing those. You know,
No.
how are we designed? We're designed to operate at a particular environment, and metabolic flexibility is the cornerstone of that. And you hit the nail on the head when you said we had just lost that.
Yeah.
We've just lost that as a population.
Well,
we were primed. You're absolutely right.
We're up to one more break from our sponsors, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Great.
Turn on your glam today. The Jenna Klein collection is here, elaborated with natural products. Give yourself a compliment with our organic lip glosses in more than 15 shades. With the Jenna Klein lip gloss collection, you can hydrate your lips and keep that glamorous look that you need. Turn on your glam. Visit jennaklein.com. And don't forget our skincare collection with natural ingredients that will improve the skin's appearance and prevent visible signs of aging. We have everything you need to achieve smooth and vitalized skin. jennaklein.com. Turn on your glam today.
This was a proud sponsor of KNLY 91.1 FM. We are broadcasting live from the Woodlands, Texas to the world. You're listening to the only multimedia FM station in Houston, Texas. Your Fusion Radio. Top 40s, dance, Latin, country, pop, rock and roll. All in one station. Mixing genres and generations. You're listening to KNLY New Waverly, Texas. 91.1 FM, The Boss.
It started as a dream. When I was a little kid, I always wanted to have my own restaurant. And it was a dream that finally we had the opportunity to build it here in the Woodlands. And I'm so happy with it.
It's a really authentic Italian food. I try to maintain the most original possible. It's very important. Every day I make my fresh pasta.
Chi mangia bene, mangia italiano. Please come and visit us.
This was a proud sponsor of KNLY 91.1 FM.
All right, well, we're back. Man, this this hour went by quick, and you know,
Yeah.
I could have, you know, caught up with you for a lot longer on a lot of other things, and I'm glad we got to have you on. And again, to reiterate to everybody, you know, you work with high-end pilots, with high-end, you know, performers. That, you know, that a lot of people, you know, we talked about this on the break, is I want everybody again to realize that's the same thing that we recommend and will help the average person. We don't, there's no difference. There's no difference from that, and there's no difference from our, you know, person that comes to see Jason or Rebecca, and some people, it's the same people that come to see me for, you know, their fatigue and all their other issues. We start with the same thing, and that's, you know, what we need to start doing with medicine is at least emphasizing the diet as part of the treatment plan. And we really
Absolutely.
don't. You know, one of the things I really stress to them is because they say, well, not that, you know, I eat good most of the time. Here's a good stat. Studies show that for every 10% of your diet that comes from processed food, your risk of death goes up by 14% of all-cause mortality. So when we're talking about that the average person is 60%, 60, what's 60 times 14? You know what I mean? It's a lot. It means a lot of extra deaths because we support agriculture that creates food that makes us sick and harms the environment, and not the production of foods, you know, whole foods, vegetables that make us healthy. It's really, really disturbing, and it has, like we kind of touched on it earlier, it has a very, very, very big cost.
Hey, Doc, do you see regular patients currently as well? Is that something you're doing?
Yeah, like I said, I'm part of a couple of different telemedicine companies. I don't actually go to a clinic per se.
Sure.
I do.
That's the future, right?
FAA medical examinations. So I have to go to a location and do that. But as far as my, you know, day-to-day general practice kind of stuff, it's mostly telemedicine, so either
Yeah.
So,
telephone or video.
besides yourself, your colleagues, people that you work with and talk to, are they comfortable giving dietary advice? Is that something that we're failing at because there's just not a comfort level with it, or is it?
Or an education level even.
Yeah. Why,
Are you talking medical colleagues?
Yes. Sorry, I could have been more clear on that.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that I think Willie hit the nail on the head. We just don't do it typically, and we're not educated on it. I mean, I would submit to you that very few medical doctors have done any amount of independent research and or investigation into food as medicine. You know,
Yeah.
I think that we're more prone to do just what we've been talking about, is identify an ailment and come up with a fix, because that keeps the client
and I
coming
still get it every day. Every day I see patients that come in and their PCP told them this, or their PCP told them that, or they told them don't eat that, or don't eat, and I ask them, like, show me the research. I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Yeah, and
that's right.
I think a lot of the advice could improve if they would get away from the don't eat this and turn it into you should eat this.
Yeah.
And focus on getting this in, and there won't be room for the other stuff. You know,
I think at the very least, you know, we have a folder that we give patients, and it talks about, you know, the information, because part of our job, you know, is just pointing them in the right resources, because the data is there. The data is there if you choose to do it. If docs want to learn, there's any number now of podcasts. We just mentioned Peter Attia. Watch The Drive. You know, watch The Pharmacy with Dr. Mark Hyman. You know, there's a lot of really great podcasts, but they're still few and far between. And, you know, I still have a lot of PCPs that kind of just blow that up. Oh, no. You just need this, or you just need this. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that. And that's what I like as far as my position as far as medicine right now, is that I feel blessed that I can prescribe if I need to. I just don't jump to that first.
Right.
Let's exhaust all the other issues, because that blood pressure medication ain't going to do that patient any good if they're still eating a poor diet every day.
Mm-hmm.
Or you know, but first we do that, and then they never get better. But then they fall back in the mindset of the patient. They're like, well, I'm on medication, it's being taken care of. Hey, my cholesterol's good, my cholesterol number's good. I'm like, that doesn't mean that you get to go eat canes every day, and you know, but because your cholesterol's good, you know. So, you know, fiscally, I'm gonna, you know, just kind of, because people can look this up. Okay, in 2018, I have this. You know, these notes. The Milken Institute issued two major reports. One was called The Cost of Chronic Diseases in the United States, and the other one's called America's Obesity Crisis, the Health and Economic Costs of Excess Weight. It showed that the direct health care costs for chronic diseases was $1.1 trillion a year in 2016. The indirect costs, lost income, productivity, things like people calling in, et cetera, is another 2.6 trillion. So that's $3.7 trillion just from chronic disease. Okay. Most of the diseases driving these costs are related to obesity, poor diet, abnormal cholesterol, osteoarthritis, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's, kidney failure, all these related to diet. It's important to note that these costs don't even include pre-diabetes, okay, which affects 1 in 2 Americans, and that itself causes heart attacks, strokes, dementia, and then later, you know, type 2.
Yep.
In the next 10 years, 83 million Americans will have 3 or more chronic diseases compared to 30 million in 2015. So it's
not
getting
if
worse.
COVID gets them first.
Well, not if COVID. Well, but again, they have a chronic disease. You're more at risk.
That's right. We're gonna pare those numbers down real quick.
Yeah. So and again, going back to COVID, you know when we talk about, well, three times more likely to die of COVID if you're overweight or obese. Well, 70% of the population is obese. 228 million Americans.
Yep.
So again, as a comparison, you know where we were. Look at an old picture of people, a group of people back in the 60s. 1962, the obesity rate was 6.2%.
Yeah. You know, I don't. Are you out in Virginia? Is that what I understand? Is that what part of the world
No,
you're
I'm
in?
in Panama City. Panama City, Florida.
Okay.
Now.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty healthy place, give or take, right? You know, you go out and you walk around, and you see a pretty normal cross section of the U.S. population, or does it tend to be a more fit city there?
Panama City is more of the redneck area. so we have more of the lower Alabama, you know, kind of if you go just west of here into like Rosemary Beach or
Yeah.
Destin, then you'll start to see.
All
more
right.
of the,
So it's a very okay. I got you. I know what you're trying to say there. I got
Yep.
you.
definitely varied.
It's weird, you know. I know where Willie and I are here north of Houston in the Woodlands. We tend to see not quite the same cross section, I think, of a lot of the country. I think it's a pretty fit place, or it seems like it is most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And then you get out and you end up on a road trip somewhere, and you stop in a Walmart in a very rural area,
Yep.
and look around, and you think
70-80% of everybody walking
oh,
around.
that's where all,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
I get it now.
Yeah.
But it can be, and for me personally, it's hard to, I don't see it every day. The places that I frequent doesn't have a lot of that,
Yeah.
you know, and, but it is out there, and it's traumatic what's happening to people.
Again, related primarily to diet. Let's start with diet. Like, start with the diet. And then, you know, like I and you, Dr. J, advocate, you know, more of a whole food, low carb, high fat, with the emphasis being getting onto metabolic flexibility or developing that, and then then being able to add in, and then seeing what they do to you, because you know I eventually what I want to do is I've tried for a while is I want to start putting CGMs on all the patients, even people that aren't diabetic. You know, they're continuous glucose monitors, and they're little, you know, you can wear them for 2 weeks, and then that way they can track their real-time blood sugar. And they can see, look what this banana did to you, or look what this banana didn't do to you. Look what this did to you, and and that way they'll have a clear picture. I think that's a more true picture of their blood sugar control and see where they're at, because you got to see where you're at to know where you're going. And you know, that's one place I'd really like to go. Right now we can't get it without a prescription yet. You know, but I'm talking to Abbott right now, but that's one place. But again, wanting to see what the impact of the food is specifically to people. Now, want to finish up with you, but I want to like touch on, like I was telling them about y'all's place in Costa Rica. So so Dr. J is a big time surfer. We put it up on the thing. I just saw the recent pictures that, you know, or the most recent pictures, but y'all have that place Via Nalu out there in
Villareal down in Costa Rica. It's right outside of Tamarindo.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
it is.
It's
awesome.
It's available to, I guess, you know, rent there on and we'll put it's at vianalu.net. But what kind of drove y'all down there? Y'all fell in love with Costa Rica and the whole, you know, Pura Vida life.
The vibe is awesome. Yeah, Pura Vida, man.
Yeah.
Good life. The slowness. The obviously the waves are perfect.
Yeah.
They can be very good for learning. They can get big. I don't like big, but it's just a great location. We've gone down there with another family for several years. This is the first summer we're not going to be able to go because of the virus.
Yeah.
In a while, but we decided a few years ago that, you know, we go down quite so often that why not try to get a rental property down there.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to when this thing calms down, heading out there and
I like
renting it out
Just
with
let
the
me know.
family and and maybe meeting y'all down there if y'all head out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just to finish up, you know, what would be your final recommendations for people if they're looking to improve their health and you know wanted to move into property?
I've got those 4 principles. I mentioned 3 of them: your feet, your forks, and your fingers. Those 3 plus the 4th one is faith. I'm not sure about you guys, but I have a very strong feeling about faith and the mental health benefits. Not only that, but the spiritual benefits and how that relates to physical health go way beyond this conversation. But those 4 principles, I call them F it. FIT is another acronym, you know. Those are kind of the principles that I would recommend to people. Be mindful of those 4.
Gotcha. Well, awesome, man. Well, it has been do you have anything else you'd like to ask Dr. J?
No, Jay, thank you so much for joining us. And we talked about before, or at the very beginning, every kid grew up wanting to be a pilot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know.
Oh, yeah, man.
It's been fun.
You know, but being able to be a physician and bring something to the table to make all the other pilots better has to be just a very good feeling, you know, and we appreciate what you've done.
Yeah, appreciate your service. You know, appreciate, you know, what you've done for us. especially in this climate.
Right.
Really, really respect military and Leos and everything, and what y'all have done for our liberty and our freedom. So thank you for coming on, and look forward to spending some time with you pretty soon. But yeah, I'll be in touch. Take care, and we are out. We'll see y'all next week on Superhuman with Dr. V and Jason Phelps.
Mm-hmm.
See you guys.
Programs presented are submitted by